The car was matte black. Brand new, still had the paper tag in the window and the protective plastic over the badge. It was parked in the executive spot closest to the building, the one with the motion-activated light and the blue ceramic tile that said "Reserved for CEO." Except it didn't belong to the CEO, it belonged to the boss. The one who, 3 days earlier, had looked me in the eye and said, "There's no budget for salary adjustments this quarter. Hope that's all right." I remember my response, not words, just a slight nod and a quiet, "Understood." Because I've learned, when someone lies to you while wearing a smile, there's no value in correcting them. The correction is structural, not verbal. My name is Elena Mercer. I was head of process strategy at Verdance, a mid-sized tech consulting firm that liked to call itself boutique, even though our billing rates rivaled the largest agencies on the coast. I didn't pitch. I didn't posture. I didn't network at offsites or present at leadership retreats. I made things work. When the front end made promises that didn't align with systems, I rebuilt the systems. When clients pushed for deliverables we hadn't scoped, I reverse engineered timelines that wouldn't collapse. And when people forgot how this company functioned, I reminded them without ever needing to say it out loud. For 5 years, I maintained that rhythm. In the background, precisely where people forget to look. And then the boss arrived. He came from finance, brought in after our Series C as part of a maturity layer for the company. Slick, well-dressed, emotionally inoffensive. He liked dashboards more than dialogue, efficiency more than resilience. In his first team-wide email, he used the word optics 4 times. In his first one-on-one with me, he said, "You strike me as the kind of person who likes to operate without being noticed." That's valuable, but hard to quantify. I told him I preferred results to recognition. He smiled and said, "Dangerous philosophy." I didn't reply. I should have known what that meant. The official justification came during Q2 reviews. A generic slide with a bolded headline, "Compensation freeze, operational stability first." Below it, 3 bullet points. None of them named names. All of them used phrases like macro climate and budget visibility and standardization. I watched the boss present the slide with confidence. He wasn't flustered, he didn't hesitate, and he ended the section with a half joke. "Remember, if you're still here, you're already valued." Some people laughed, I didn't, because I knew exactly what that meant. 2 weeks before that meeting, I had submitted a formal request for a salary adjustment. It wasn't spontaneous. It came after 2 consecutive quarters of pulling double bandwidth, covering an associate who was on medical leave, then onboarding their replacement when they never returned. I had kept the project roadmap alive, redesigned the delivery logic, absorbed 2 client escalations without escalation, and added $240,000 in retained value through process corrections no one else even saw happen. I attached documentation, backed every metric with traceable output. The boss responded, "Appreciate the clarity. Let me sync with finance." That was the last message I got until the all-hands slide. After the meeting, I didn't storm into his office, didn't send a follow-up, didn't even mention it to my team. I simply returned to my desk and adjusted a private timeline I'd been tracking. I didn't need confrontation. I needed distance. That same week, he posted a photo on LinkedIn. Caption, "Momentum means treating yourself when the metrics align." The photo was taken in front of the matte black car, the same one parked in the CEO spot, the same one everyone pretended not to notice. Except they did. People talked, but always in hypotheticals. I'm sure it's leased through corporate. He's probably not taking a bonus this year. Maybe it's a performance vehicle for optics. Optics. There was that word again. I watched it all happen and said nothing. Not because I was resigned, because I was studying the angle of descent. The following month, he launched a new initiative. All system leads were asked to submit documentation on non-essential processes. The email opened with, "We believe in protecting what matters. Let's make sure we know what doesn't." Translation, we're getting ready to cut things, roles, teams people, the systems that no one notices until they vanish. I submitted a list, clear, efficient, targeted, but I also ran a second report, privately. It tracked which non-essential processes triggered daily logic gates across 3 departments, how many workflows they touched, which teams they connected, what would break if they quietly disappeared. The results weren't surprising, but they were damning. The smallest process, an unassuming permissions check I had built in my second year, was preventing $60,000 per month in billing slippage. No one knew, because no one was supposed to. And if he planned to remove me from the system, then I wanted to make sure the system remembered what I had held in place, not to prove a point, to preserve the truth. Because if the collapse came, I wanted to be able to say, I didn't cause it. I just stopped preventing it. I didn't quit. I didn't slack. I didn't act any different, at least not on the surface. I arrived on time, answered what I was asked, completed what was assigned. But behind every action, I had already changed the premise. The boss assumed the company would keep working the way it always had, even as he started stripping away the pieces he couldn't see. He thought the systems were automated, repeatable, self-sustaining. They weren't. They were carried by people like me, and I had just decided to stop caring quietly. The first thing I adjusted was how I communicated. I stopped translating. No more preemptive explanations, no more context built into quick replies. If someone misunderstood an instruction, I let the confusion happen. If a team submitted the wrong file, I let it reach the client. If no one remembered why we never used a certain vendor, I let them find out the hard way. It wasn't sabotage, it was subtraction. For years, I had been the human margin of error, the one who made sure nothing slipped. Now, I let things slip. At first, it looked like friction, just minor issues, a mismatched invoice, a missed handoff, a calendar invite without the right people. But friction has a way of echoing when there's no one left absorbing it. Next, I pulled back from meeting loops. I stopped reminding people what had already been documented. I didn't bring the old diagrams, didn't offer historical context, didn't prompt the boss when he stumbled through a client update call that relied on timeline logic I'd written. I let the gaps become visible. And they did, fast. A rep built a proposal based on the wrong version of a pricing model. The client flagged it, the project paused. No one knew where the error had started. The boss blamed internal misalignment. But it wasn't misalignment, it was absence. The process had depended on me being the unacknowledged alignment function. The boss had removed the cost, and now he was starting to feel the price. Then came the micro escalations. Nothing big, just relentless. A vendor requested retroactive clarification on a usage cap. A new hire couldn't figure out how permissioning worked between two platforms. Legal couldn't locate the root logic for our procurement thresholds. All of it had once passed through me. All of it now had no owner. One of the junior analysts pinged me privately. Hey, sorry, do you know who built the ops bridge logic for pricing exclusions? I answered truthfully. I did. It wasn't documented. It ran through me manually. She didn't reply, but 2 hours later, I saw her logged into the permissions dashboard for almost 40 minutes. She was trying to reverse engineer something I had managed in 6 clicks, because I had known which toggles were real and which were artifacts. That was the moment I realized. They weren't just noticing I was quiet, they were starting to remember what happened when I spoke. Because now that I wasn't talking, the system wasn't either. I started backing up my work, not the sanitized reports, not the versions they saved to shared drives, the real ones. The ones with side notes, branching logic, time-stamped exceptions. The ones that showed where the client almost left, but didn't. The ones that explained why we skipped 2 vendors and rewrote a workflow from scratch because someone in procurement didn't notice a kill clause. I didn't do it because I needed leverage. I did it because I knew what came next. I had watched it happen before, twice in other companies, once in this one. When systems collapse, the instinct is to assign blame. And blame always reaches for the person whose name was last on the file. I wasn't going to be that person. So I archived carefully. Not publicly, not aggressively, just methodically. I also mapped ownership. Every automation, every logic trigger, every SLA that looked like it ran itself. I traced back which ones had ever actually broken and which ones I had quietly fixed without asking for credit. I marked those, because if they broke again, I wanted to be very sure no one could pretend they never needed me in the first place. Then I started rerouting informal dependencies. Support teams used to ping me directly when they needed to circumvent policy cleanly. Finance would call for quiet clarification when something didn't match projections. Now, I began redirecting. Please ask product. You'll want to check that with procurement. This falls under RevOps now. Each time I stepped back, I made sure no one could say I ghosted the process. I was polite, prompt, documented, but I was gone. And slowly, things began to tangle. People didn't notice right away, they just started repeating themselves, double-checking, asking the same question twice because they weren't confident in the first answer. One afternoon, the boss messaged me directly. "Hey, can you hop on for a quick alignment chat? Nothing urgent." I didn't decline, I just replied, "Happy to assist. Let me know what the scope of the alignment is." He never followed up, because scope was the one thing he never understood. He thought leadership was volume, presence, optics. He didn't realize it was always process, and process only works when the quiet parts still trust the system they support. I no longer did. By then, I had stopped anticipating risk, stopped saving launches from themselves, stopped translating emotionless policy into client-facing empathy. I let people do their jobs, exactly as written. And for the first time in years, I watched the company operate exactly as the boss believed it should, which meant no memory, no context, no safety net, and very, very soon, no explanation. It didn't start with panic, it started with missing data. One of our most reliable clients, an international shipping platform we'd supported since their Series A, flagged a mismatch in their quarterly usage report. The boss tried to explain it away as a data sync issue, but it wasn't. The new usage model had replaced a manual override I'd maintained for years. Because our standard calculation didn't apply to how they clustered deliveries across zones, we'd built an exception protocol together, quietly, without escalation, without documentation. They'd never needed to question the logic because it always worked. Now, it didn't. The client's email wasn't angry, just surgical. "Can you walk us through the adjustment? We don't see the basis for the numbers." The account manager panicked. The analytics team rechecked the script. The boss responded with a 3-paragraph message filled with phrases like recalibrated logic and enhanced accuracy models. The client replied with one sentence, "Can Elena verify this?" I wasn't copied on that thread, but it found its way to me. I didn't respond, not because I was withholding, because no one had asked. Later that afternoon, the account manager came by my desk, hesitant. "Hey, sorry to bug you, but we're trying to rebuild the freight zone logic for Eurotier. Did you ever write that down anywhere?" I looked up slowly. "No," I said. "It was never meant to be separated from billing logic. Once you split them, the assumptions no longer hold." He blinked, then asked the real question. "So, is it wrong now?" I didn't answer, because he already knew. Across the hallway, I heard the boss pacing on a call, voice lowered but sharp. Yes, we're addressing that. The analyst team is on it. It's a formatting discrepancy, not a structural issue." But it was structural, and it wasn't the only one. A week later, the implementation team flagged 2 onboarding delays. The issue? Client data wasn't mapping correctly into our delivery engine. A small fix, if you knew where to look. I had once built a bypass protocol for that exact scenario. It had been quietly removed 2 months earlier as part of system simplification. Now, no one could remember how it had worked in the first place. The boss asked for a full audit. The results came back with a phrase I hadn't seen in a long time. Unresolvable through current documentation. That's corporate language for we don't know who used to handle this, and we're afraid to guess. In the next leadership meeting, I watched him scroll through slides with his usual poise. But his voice was tighter. He skipped over 2 client logos, didn't mention a delayed launch, used passive voice to describe the problem. The configuration was not preserved. Not we lost the override, not we ignored a dependency, just not preserved. The more he spoke, the more I realized something critical. He was no longer trying to solve the issue. He was trying to survive the story. Because the clients were starting to ask questions, not just about numbers, about memory. Who made this decision? Why was this changed? Where is the person who used to answer these things? And the answers, the real ones, were no longer in the room, because I wasn't. The week the finance team pulled back projections, everything went quiet. No announcement, no panic, just a subtle edit to the internal dashboard. Q4 forecast, revised downward by 14%. No one explained it, but we all knew. 1 lost renewal, 2 delayed launches, 3 clients on silent watch. None of them had sent angry emails. They just slowed, stopped replying as quickly, asked more questions. Began copying in legal, procurement, and sometimes no one at all. It wasn't rejection, it was retreat. And inside the company, the pattern was the same. One team missed their weekly sync, another requested resource reduction for bandwidth reasons. A third sent a note to HR that began with, "I've been thinking about alignment lately," but the worst sign didn't come from them. It came from someone like me. Jason, a senior workflow engineer who had been with Verdance almost as long as I had, asked to be removed from the cross-functional leadership channel. No explanation, no pushback. Just a line in Slack. Not adding value there anymore. When people like Jason unplug, it's never random, it's math. He had calculated the signal-to-noise ratio and found it unworthy of his time. The boss tried to recover momentum. He brought in an outside consultant, talked about objectivity, reset, and removing emotional drag from operations. The consultant asked for system documentation, a map of decision pathways, historical justification for delivery timelines. He couldn't provide it because it didn't exist, because it had never needed to until now. Because people like me had carried it in our heads, in our hands, across every corridor no one thought to formalize. And we had stopped carrying. The boss called a core alignment huddle for senior leaders. I was invited, I declined. He called me after the meeting, not via assistant, not by Slack, direct. "Hey, I've been noticing some drift. Would love to reconnect and reestablish mutual visibility." I let the words hang, then replied, "Drift is a natural outcome of severed continuity. Visibility doesn't fix missing logic." Silence. Then he said, "I just want to get ahead of anything systemic." I almost laughed, but I didn't, because by then, it wasn't systemic, it was personal. Every corner he cut had a name. Every shortcut he designed had erased a function. And every polished sentence he delivered from a stage had cost the company one more person who used to make things quietly hold. And now, the structure was still standing, but the gravity had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The company was no longer running toward something, it was gripping the edge, hoping someone, anyone, would reach back in and reattach the spine. I didn't offer. Because some systems don't deserve rescue, not when they're this committed to pretending nothing's wrong. The first client to leave didn't complain, they didn't ask for renegotiation, didn't request a discount, didn't cite performance metrics or reference SLAs. They simply submitted a cancellation notice with 30 days lead time, as per contract. The email was short, professional. "We appreciate the years of collaboration and wish Verdance continued success." No emotion, no fire, just precision. And that's what made it devastating. Because clients like that, ones who never escalated, never pushed back, always paid on time, don't leave because of a single failure. They leave because of fatigue. Because they can tell the quiet infrastructure that used to hold them is no longer there. They feel the change in tone. They see the difference in how questions are answered, or not answered at all. They don't write angry emails. They just leave. When the cancellation hit the pipeline dashboard, the boss didn't panic. He pivoted. He called an emergency renewal strategy sprint. Said we needed to engage differently, rebuild trust, and show clients that we're more than deliverables. The phrase stuck with me. More than deliverables, because that's what people say when they realize they no longer know how to deliver. Meanwhile, inside the company, something else was happening. A quiet stalling, responses slowed, Slack channels that used to buzz with coordination now sat empty for hours. Project tickets stayed in awaiting clarification for days. People stopped asking questions. Not because they understood everything, but because they no longer trusted the answers. The boss kept pushing. He set up bi-weekly huddles, introduced a gamified dashboard to reward visibility, began praising people for stepping up when all they had done was pick up someone else's drop thread. But no one smiled anymore when their name was called, because we all knew the game. He wasn't celebrating success, he was fishing for lifelines. I attended the meetings, I took notes, I nodded when appropriate, but I never spoke. And in that silence, I could feel something shifting, not just around me, but toward me. A slow rotation of heads, a weight in the room moving back in my direction. Not because I asked for it, not because I positioned myself, but because systems, when they begin to fall, instinctively search for where the weight used to hold. And for years, that had been me. The cracks weren't sudden, they were architectural, misaligned product scopes, overpromised implementation dates, billing discrepancies no one could trace, client feedback that wasn't routed, strategic decks that quoted numbers with no footnotes. None of it exploded, it just sagged, and the sagging was everywhere. The boss still moved with confidence, still wore tailored shirts and mentioned his advisory board contacts in passing. But his voice had changed. It was slower. He started repeating himself, started ending meetings early, because collapse doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives with exhaustion, not of resources, of belief. And belief, I had quietly learned, is the only thing more essential than systems. It ended exactly the way it began, quietly. No confrontation, no explosion, no dramatic resignation speech, just a chain of unreadable numbers, a few skipped meetings, and one very specific phone call. It came from legal, not external, internal. They were conducting an informal review of Q4 deliverables. Nothing urgent, they said, just a few clarifications on contract execution versus actual scope. They asked for alignment records on a multi-region logistics rollout. I had been the last person to manage that client 2 years ago. The boss had reassigned the account, centralized the team, and removed all custom workflows. He said it would streamline delivery. Instead, it delayed the rollout by 6 weeks and triggered 3 amendment requests. 2 of those amendments were accepted. The third had never been resolved. Now legal was asking, what was the original promise? No one had the answer. Not product, not sales, not the boss. They pinged me, nicely, cautiously. I sent over a zipped folder. Timestamps, call transcripts, margin notes, no emotion. 2 hours later, I got a simple message. Thank you, you probably saved us 6 figures. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not for me, for him. The next week, the boss didn't lead the Monday sync. The calendar said facilitated by interim. No one asked questions, no one joked. He didn't appear for the Thursday check-in either. No out-of-office message, no update from HR, just absence. And that absence told everyone what we already suspected. He had been the one removed, not formally, not forcefully, strategically. Because even the board knew, you can't keep pouring trust into a structure that leaks from the center. I never said a word, never claimed credit, never asked who made the decision, because legacy isn't about who wins, it's about who endures. After that, the company shifted. Meetings shortened. Presentations became less decorative. Processes started being questioned, not with defensiveness, but with interest. Someone created a shared folder titled, What Actually Works? And slowly the weight redistributed, not to new people, to the right people. A few weeks later, I received a message from our CO. Would you be open to advising a restructure of the delivery model? Quietly, from the inside. I said yes, but I didn't ask for a raise. Didn't mention the salary freeze. Didn't refer to the car, because by now, everyone already knew. What I carried, what I withheld, and what I let collapse was never personal. It was the price of forgetting who actually held the blueprint. And when you forget that long enough, eventually, you pay. They didn't ask me to come back because I had never officially left. I was still in the org chart, still had my title, still showed up, did the work, answered the things within scope. But over the last few months, they had all quietly learned something the hard way. There is a difference between someone who executes tasks and someone who holds coherence. And coherence had gone missing. At first, they blamed complexity. Then they blamed velocity. Then they blamed the boss, who by now had disappeared so completely that even HR refused to confirm his employment status. And after they ran out of places to push the discomfort, they turned toward the one thing they had spent a year pretending they didn't need, someone who remembered why it all made sense in the first place. That's when the messages began, not from senior leaders, from people 2, 3 layers below. Hey Elena, I'm reviewing the rollout logic for client-side data mapping. The structure feels off. Was this always handled through staging first? Do you happen to remember if we ever built an exception into Tier 2 onboarding for overlapping accounts? I found a reference to a process you use to manage manually, something about nightly sync overrides. Is that still active? They weren't big questions, not loud, but each one chipped away at the illusion that the system was just slow. Each question revealed a deeper fear, that the system wasn't slow, it was empty, running on echoes of something someone once understood but had since forgotten how to describe. I didn't point this out. I didn't say, see? I answered, gently, accurately, without tone, and with each answer the pattern shifted. People stopped escalating to cover mistakes. They started asking upstream. They slowed down, not from apathy, but from caution, because they no longer trusted the infrastructure to hold without verification. That was the first sign that something real was changing. The second came when the interim COO invited me to a closed-door session on organizational memory. No slides, no preamble, just a whiteboard with one question. Where did we stop knowing what we were doing? It was a brutal question, and no one had a clean answer. So they turned to me, not as a savior, not even as a leader, just as the person in the room who hadn't forgotten what the system was for. I didn't give a speech. I pulled out a page I had folded in my notebook, an old diagram I'd kept not because it was special, but because it still worked. A simple logic map, the original delivery model, the one that was built before the boss layered over it with visual simplifications. The room went still. No one said anything for a moment. Then the COO said, "This feels like the first time I've seen something solid in months." I said nothing. I didn't need to, because the real victory wasn't in being right. It was in watching people finally crave clarity again. They didn't hand me back a role. They handed me weight, the kind that comes with silent influence. People started copying me on things again, not because they had to, but because they were afraid not to. When finance ran a variance check on pipeline projections, they asked for Elena's pass. When legal prepped new contract language, they tagged me for historical logic. I became the shadow standard. No title change, no recognition. But in every room, the silent question was, does this hold up if Elena sees it? And that was enough. Because legacy doesn't announce itself. It becomes the thing people reach for. When the noise has finally collapsed, I didn't leave with a speech. There was no announcement, no farewell lunch, no standing ovation in the cafeteria, just an email, scheduled for 7 o'clock a.m., sent to a short list. Effective end of week, I'll be stepping away from Verdance. I'm deeply proud of the systems we built, the logic we restored, and the clarity we fought to maintain. Thank you for what we carried together. No bitterness, no explanation, just the truth. And the truth was, I had stayed long enough. Long enough to see the chaos settle, long enough to see silence return to its proper place, not as absence, but as strength. Long enough to watch a company forget what made it strong, and then quietly, slowly, remember. In my last week, I trained no one. Instead, I answered one question. What would you do differently if you were just starting over? And I told them this: design everything like the person who knows how it works might not be here tomorrow. They wrote it down, and I knew then they were ready. Ready to hold what I had once carried. Not perfectly, not completely, but intentionally, and that was enough. On my final day, the interim COO stopped by my desk. He didn't sit, didn't offer a handshake, just stood beside me, quiet for a moment. Then he said, the system didn't need more dashboards, it needed more people who remembered why it was built in the first place. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. As I packed the last file from my drawer, I saw the page again. The original logic map. Faint pencil lines, still accurate. I left it on the table. Unframed, unclaimed. Because legacy doesn't need your name on the wall. It only needs one thing: to still make sense after you're gone. I walked out without looking back. Not because I was indifferent, because I had done enough. Let others walk faster. I had walked deeper. And in that depth, I had built something that didn't need me anymore. Just someone, someday, wise enough to let it breathe.